This is the story of a taxi driver who picked up the wrong passenger. He told it only once. Daniel had long ago stopped thinking of the city at night as a place that belonged to people. In daylight, it swarmed with them. Office workers rushing to appointments, families spilling out of corner cafes, buses huffing like tired animals as they dragged themselves from stop to stop. But past midnight, after the bars emptied and the last trains clattered into their stations, the city seemed to shed its human skin. What remained was something colder, quieter, almost predatory. That was when Daniel worked best. He had been driving a taxi for 12 years, and for the last 6, he had chosen the night shift. The money wasn't better. Not really. Fares dropped off after 2 a.m., but the nights offered something he preferred to the blinding traffic of the day: space. The roads unspooled in long, empty ribbons. The air grew cleaner, the neon sharper. And in that strange stillness he found a rhythm, one that was part solitude and part watchfulness. His colleagues teased him about it. "You'll turn into a ghost yourself, Dan," they'd say, when he clocked in at the depot at 10 each night, thermos of black coffee in hand. He slid behind the wheel of his cab, the familiar creak of the driver's seat greeting him like an old friend. The dashboard lights cast a soft green glow over his hands and the smudges of coffee on the cup holder. He checked the mirrors out of habit, not because anyone was there. The streets were empty at this hour, save for the occasional street lamp flickering against the mist. Daniel liked it that way. There was a precision to the night, a rhythm that allowed him to anticipate the city's moods and movements. He shifted into gear and eased out of the depot, letting the tires roll over the damp asphalt. The scent of rain hung faintly in the air, mixed with the sharper tang of exhaust from a truck that rumbled past in the distance. Neon signs blinked lazily in shop windows, some advertising businesses long since closed, some flickering in ways that made him question whether they had ever been functional. There was a kind of poetry in it, a soft music beneath the hum of his engine, if you listened closely enough. Most nights passed quietly, in a steady loop of pickups and drop-offs. He had memorized the streets and their peculiarities: the pothole near the corner of 5th and Main, the flickering light at the intersection of Crane Avenue, the short stretch of sidewalk that rattled under the tires as if protesting each car that passed. The city was predictable, at least in the way a well-practiced dance could be predictable, and Daniel took comfort in it. Yet there were nights when the predictability slipped. Shadows stretched wrong across buildings. Streetlights dimmed in clusters, casting odd pools of darkness. And sometimes, from behind a closed curtain or beneath the glow of a window, he could swear he saw movement, quick, deliberate, impossible to identify. He never mentioned it. Night drivers learned early to keep certain observations to themselves. The city had its secrets, and it tolerated those who respected them. Daniel's shift was still young, but already the streets were thinning. He drove past shuttered diners, their neon signs buzzing faintly, and darkened storefronts where long-forgotten posters clung stubbornly to the glass. A few lone pedestrians moved under the weak glare of streetlights, heads down against the chill. He passed them with polite nods or waves, small acknowledgments of shared humanity in the sleeping city. He thought about his routine, how he liked the hum of the tires on wet asphalt, how the slight vibration of the steering wheel through his hands had become a kind of meditation. The night demanded attention, and that attention offered clarity. He could sense the subtle shifts in air, the faint metallic tang that preceded rain, the distant echo of footsteps on concrete. It was all part of his world, the world of the night driver, where perception mattered more than speed and patience mattered more than ambition. And then his phone buzzed. A dispatch notification, a pickup at the edge of town in a part of the city he rarely traveled. His instincts prickled at the message, a whisper of unease he couldn't ignore. Still, he was a professional. He noted the location, adjusted the mirror, and merged into the streets leading north, past areas he recognized and into those he didn't. The further he drove, the quieter the city became. Streetlights thinned until only occasional halos marked the pavement. Fog drifted in low, curling around the tires, and the faint outlines of buildings grew ambiguous, almost dreamlike. Daniel's hand tightened on the wheel, not in fear, but in awareness. There was something about the edges of the city at night, places where the map didn't quite match the ground, where the ordinary laws of geometry and perception seemed to waver. He arrived at the curb and spotted the man waiting. Under the weak glow of a flickering street lamp, he looked ordinary enough, pale in the light, but slightly out of step with the world around him. His clothes were modest, clean, yet outdated, and there was a stillness in his posture that made Daniel hesitate for the first time all night. "Evening," Daniel said, pulling up beside the curb. The man nodded once, small and deliberate. "Evening, can you take me north? I'll give directions." His voice was calm, neutral, polite, but carried an edge of something Daniel couldn't place. Daniel unlocked the door and watched as the man slid into the back seat. He settled in without a word, hands folded neatly on his lap, eyes catching the faint reflections of neon in the glass. Daniel started the meter and eased the car forward. The city stretched ahead in long ribbons of empty road. Daniel felt the familiar rhythm settle over him. The pulse of the tires, the hum of the engine, the whisper of the night. And yet, a small knot of unease had planted itself in his chest. He didn't know it yet, but tonight the quiet would bend. The ordinary would fracture, and his night, like so many before, would not end as expected. The man settled into the back seat with the kind of quiet precision Daniel had learned to respect over the years. He didn't fumble with his coat or shift nervously, didn't glance at his phone or tap his fingers. He simply sat upright, hands folded neatly on his lap, and waited. Daniel glanced at him in the rearview mirror, noting the sharp lines of his jaw and the pallor of his skin, faintly illuminated by the flickering streetlight outside. Ordinary, yet somehow wrong. "Name?" Daniel asked, a habit more than a courtesy. He usually asked, and passengers usually responded with a muttered John or Sarah. Most didn't care for conversation, but some appreciated it. "Call me Philip," the man said. The syllables were clipped but polite, smooth as if measured in advance. Daniel nodded, keeping his eyes on the road. "All right, Philip. Where to?" The man explained the route in a careful, deliberate tone, not in the broad terms most people used, but in precise turns and landmarks. "Turn left at the church, then right after the old library, continue until the road narrows. Then, I'll tell you where to stop." His directions were exact, almost obsessive, yet delivered with a calm neutrality that made Daniel uneasy, in a way he could neither define nor shake. Daniel followed, noting the landmarks the man mentioned. The church appeared as instructed, its stone facade darker than it should have been under the weak streetlights. The library, he realized, had been demolished years ago. A chill ran up his spine. He glanced in the rearview mirror again, catching the man's profile in the dim cab light. Philip's eyes were fixed forward, expression neutral, untouched by the subtle shifts around them. Daniel shook his head slowly. "You sure you know this place? That library's been gone for a decade." Philip's lips curled into the faintest of smiles. "It's still there, just not for everyone." Daniel forced a laugh. "All right, if you say so." His voice had an edge of unease he didn't intend to show, but the streets were changing beneath him. Side roads twisted in ways he didn't recognize. The usual landmarks stretched or disappeared entirely. The familiar rhythm of his night drive, the hum of tires on asphalt, the distant echoes of distant traffic, was replaced by a silence that pressed against the car like water against a hull. The fog thickened as they continued. Streetlights flickered in rapid succession, casting pools of orange light that seemed to bend, shift, and disappear before he could reach them. Shadows gathered in corners that should have been empty. Daniel tightened his grip on the wheel, the leather cool beneath his palms. "You always drive nights?" Philip asked suddenly, voice calm, almost conversational. "Yeah," Daniel said, cautious. "Been doing it for 12 years. 6 on nights. There's something about it. You see things other people don't." Philip hummed under his breath. a low, almost melodic sound that Daniel couldn't place. It was archaic in tone, unsettlingly familiar, yet foreign at the same time. He felt it more than he heard it, a vibration in the air that pressed against his ears and chest. "What's that?" Daniel asked. Philip shook his head slightly, smiling faintly. "Nothing, just a tune I remember." Daniel returned his attention to the road, but unease had settled over him like a second skin. He noticed details he didn't recognize, buildings that appeared older than the city should allow, paint peeling in patterns he had never seen, windows reflecting light that didn't exist. A street sign loomed, crooked and faded, with a name he didn't recognize, one that seemed to belong to a map that had never been drawn. "Where exactly are we going?" Daniel asked, trying to keep his voice casual, though his pulse had picked up. Philip's gaze remained forward, calm, untroubled by the subtle distortions around them. "You'll see soon enough. Just follow my directions." He offered to turn down a narrow alley Daniel had never noticed. The walls were close, bricks damp with mist. The streetlight overhead flickered violently, casting a thin, wavering shadow across Philip's face. For a moment, Daniel thought he saw the edges of the man blur, as though the air around him shifted like heat above asphalt. "Okay," Daniel said, voice tighter than intended. "You sure this is a real street?" Philip tilted his head slightly, considering. "It exists, just not in the way you know it." Daniel swallowed hard, gripping the wheel a little tighter. He had driven long enough to know the difference between nerves and instinct. This felt like instinct. Something was not right, but the man in his back seat remained entirely ordinary, entirely polite, entirely present. The cab rolled forward, tires whispering on asphalt that seemed to stretch and bend beneath them. A lone cat darted across the road, eyes glowing faintly in the fog. Daniel's heart rate ticked up, but he forced himself to focus, tracing the landmarks Philip named. Each one appeared exactly as described, yet each carried a subtle dissonance. The air smelled faintly metallic, and a cool wind seemed to rise from nowhere, curling around the edges of the car. Philip hummed again. This time Daniel thought he heard a word within the tune, almost lost in the melody. "Home." "Home?" Daniel asked, uncertain if he should voice the thought aloud. Philip did not respond immediately. When he finally spoke, it was softly, almost as if to himself. "Almost." Daniel swallowed. Something about the cadence of the word, the calmness of the delivery, pressed against the air like a warning. He tried to shake it off, tried to tell himself he was imagining it, but the city had changed around him. Each turn seemed to take him further from the maps he knew, further from the grid of streets and avenues he had memorized. And yet, Philip remained unchanged, calm, ordinary and polite, detached from the oddities that seemed to creep into the car like fog seeping through the edges of reality. Daniel realized that, somehow, the passenger was a constant in a city that was bending, twisting, and becoming unfamiliar with each passing block. He didn't speak again, letting the humming fill the silence as the cab continued forward. The streetlights flickered one final time before vanishing altogether, leaving only the faint glow of neon in the distance. Daniel adjusted the rear-view mirror, catching a glimpse of Philip's pale face, framed by shadows that shouldn't exist. A chill ran up Daniel's spine. He had driven enough nights to know that the quiet ones, the polite, the still, were almost never just people. Something about them lingered, a trace of something else. He didn't yet know what. He only knew that tonight, as he followed Philip's directions deeper into the city's twisting, unfamiliar veins, he had stepped into one of those nights. And the night was only just beginning. The streets had started to feel wrong almost immediately after the library. Daniel couldn't put his finger on it at first. The turns Philip gave were precise, almost obsessive in their detail, yet none of the roads appeared on the GPS. Even the city map he had memorized for years seemed to flicker and fade under his mental eye. It was as if they were threading through the skeleton of a city that existed beside, beneath, or perhaps beyond the one he knew. Turn left here, Philip instructed, voice calm, eyes fixed ahead, unblinking. Then take the second, right after the old church. Daniel obeyed, though unease gnawed at the edges of his thoughts. The old church was unfamiliar, its spire dark against the fog, its bricks darker than the night around it. Windows glowed faintly, though he could see no light source, and the doors appeared shut. He passed it slowly, instinctively checking the rearview mirror. Philip's reflection was unchanged, serene, as if the city's subtle distortions held no sway over him. Daniel shifted uncomfortably in his seat. This doesn't look familiar. Are you sure this is the way? Philip hummed softly, almost absently. It is. That was all. No apology, no explanation, no acknowledgement that the streets were bending around them. Daniel swallowed hard and pressed on. The longer he drove, the more anomalies appeared. Street signs bore names he had never seen. Buildings leaned at impossible angles, their windows glowing faintly but offering no view of interiors. Pavement cracked and reformed beneath his tires, patches of road appearing and disappearing as if the city were breathing beneath him. Daniel's fingers tightened on the wheel, knuckles white. He tried to focus on the road, on the hum of the engine, anything to ground himself, but the quiet was too absolute, pressing in from all sides. Do you always get lost at night? Philip asked suddenly, his voice cutting through the silence. Daniel blinked. No, not really. I usually know these streets better than anyone. Philip's faint smile was unsettling, as if he already knew Daniel's thoughts. Then this is new. Daniel didn't respond. There was nothing to say. Words would not capture the strangeness of the streets. The way shadows pooled too thickly in alleys, the absence of any other vehicle, the occasional flicker of movement at the edge of his vision that vanished when he turned to look. Every instinct in his body told him he was somewhere he should not be. Yet Philip remained calm, serene, unshaken by the shifting city. A low humming began again, barely audible at first, rising and falling in odd melodic intervals. Daniel couldn't identify it. It was ancient, familiar in a way that tugged at memory without revealing its source. He wanted to ask, to demand what it meant, but the sound held him in place, almost hypnotic, like a tide pulling him further into unknown waters. Almost there, Philip said finally, after a stretch of road that seemed to stretch endlessly. His voice was soft, but precise, carrying the same authority as before, though it conveyed nothing human. Daniel followed the directions, turning where instructed, passing intersections that should have been familiar but now appeared alien. Even the cab seemed to respond differently, the tires gliding over the asphalt as though the road itself were guiding them. The air grew colder as they progressed. Mist swirled around the car, curling in the headlights in patterns that made the edges of buildings blur. Daniel's breath fogged inside the cab, though the windows remained closed. There were sounds he couldn't place, faint creaks, the whisper of distant doors, a scraping against metal that echoed from nowhere. Daniel's stomach knotted. He had driven nights for years, faced erratic drivers, drunks, strange passengers, but this was different. The city itself seemed alive, reacting to the man in his back seat. The streets were no longer predictable. The geometry of familiar routes had shifted into something unrecognizable. And yet Philip never wavered. Calm, polite, unshakable. Daniel realized that the humming had become a tune, faintly recognizable, yet impossibly old-fashioned. It tugged at memories he couldn't place, like childhood songs recalled in fragments that made no sense in context. He shivered and gripped the wheel tighter. You've done this before, he said finally, almost to himself. Driven this neighborhood? Philip did not answer immediately. When he finally spoke, it was soft, almost a whisper. I have waited. You are ready. Daniel's pulse quickened, and he pressed the accelerator cautiously, feeling the car respond with a smoothness that was almost unreal. The fog thickened further, and the faint outlines of buildings seemed to shimmer, bending slightly in the corner of his vision. He blinked and shook his head. Nothing stayed the same for more than a second. Every turn brought a subtle shift. A lamppost that hadn't been there, a window that reflected a different sky, a brick wall that pulsed faintly like it was breathing. A distant sound made him freeze, a faint, echoing footstep behind the cab. He glanced into the mirrors, but the streets were empty. The mist had swallowed any trace of motion. He exhaled slowly, trying to ground himself. Philip's voice, calm as ever, broke the silence. Almost there. Daniel swallowed hard. He had no idea what that meant anymore. He could no longer recognize the city, the familiar streets replaced by impossibly narrow alleys, buildings that seemed older than the city itself, streetlights that flickered in impossible sequences. Each turn, each instruction, carried him further from everything he knew. And yet, the man in his back seat remained ordinary, pale, polite, still, unchanged by the strangeness that enveloped them. Daniel gripped the wheel and continued. The road stretched ahead like a ribbon of smoke, winding and uncertain, leading him deeper into the unknown. The hum in the air, faint and melodic, wove around the cab like a second presence. He realized, with a cold clarity, that whatever lay at the end of this route would not be something the city, or he, was prepared for. And still he drove. The alley spat them out onto a wider road, one Daniel could not place on any map. The cab rolled forward in hesitant silence, headlights cutting across a street lined with houses that seemed half real, half memory. Their shapes were familiar, but their edges wavered in the mist, as though they had been pulled from an old photograph and pressed clumsily into the present. Daniel slowed. The neighborhood was utterly still. No dogs barked behind fences. No televisions flickered through curtained windows. And yet, faint lights glowed within some of the houses, pale, flickering, like candle flames seen through frosted glass. The sight unsettled him more than complete darkness would have. Darkness had rules. This was harder to explain. Here, Philip said softly, leaning forward for the first time, his pale face briefly caught in the wash of the dashboard glow. "Stop here." Daniel pulled the car to the curb in front of a two-story house with peeling white paint and shutters that dangled from rusted hinges. Its windows were lit faintly from within, though the curtains were drawn. He couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was watching. Philip reached into his coat and placed something on the seat beside Daniel. A coin. Old, tarnished, its edges uneven, as though it had been pressed by hand. Daniel glanced at it frowning. The surface bore a symbol he didn't recognize. Curved lines etched into metal that shimmered faintly in the cab's light. "That's for the ride," Philip said. His tone was polite, final. Daniel turned, ready to ask what it was, ready to ask why the GPS hadn't tracked their journey, why the streets seemed to bend and twist like a dream. But his words froze in his throat. The back seat was empty. The door had never opened. The cab hadn't shifted with the weight of someone leaving. One moment Philip was there, pale hands folded neatly in his lap. The next, there was nothing. The seat was damp, as though someone had left it moments ago, condensation clinging to the window nearest it. Daniel's pulse hammered in his ears. He scrambled out of the cab, scanning the street. The fog was thicker now, curling against the houses, wrapping them in a cocoon of silence. Not a soul moved. The house Philip had indicated loomed before him, its curtains drawn, its faint interior light pulsing like a heartbeat. "Hello?" Daniel called out, though his voice sounded thin, swallowed by the mist. "Hey, where'd you go?" No response. He stepped closer to the house, heart thudding, eyes fixed on the faint glow behind the curtains. For a moment, he thought he saw a shadow move across the window, tall, deliberate, human. But when he blinked, the curtains stilled, and the glow dimmed as if retreating deeper into the house. A chill swept over him. He turned back toward the cab, forcing himself to breathe. The coin still sat where Philip had placed it, gleaming faintly in the dashboard light. Impossible, he thought. Coins like that didn't exist. Not anymore. He slid back into the driver's seat, fingers trembling as he picked it up. It was heavier than he expected, cold enough to burn against his skin. The etchings along its surface seemed to shift when he turned in the light, the curves and lines refusing to settle into one pattern. He dropped it back onto the seat with a muttered curse. Daniel put the cab into gear. The sooner he got out of this place, the better. But as he drove, something strange happened. The streets that had twisted and turned so unnaturally on the way here now seemed to fold back into themselves. Within minutes, he found himself emerging onto a familiar stretch of road, one he had driven countless times before. The fog thinned. The streetlights regained their ordinary glow. And just like that, the neighborhood was gone, swallowed whole as if it had never existed. Daniel drove in silence, the coin gleaming faintly beside him. By the time he returned to the depot, the city seemed utterly normal. Cars moved through intersections. Bars spilled out their last stragglers. The hum of ordinary life resumed, oblivious to what he had just experienced. But when he reached to pick up the coin again, he found the seat dry, the condensation gone. The coin was still there, impossible, alien, gleaming in a way that refused to be ignored. Daniel sat in the cab a long time, staring at it, listening to the faint hum of the city around him. And for the first time in years, he wasn't sure he wanted to drive the night anymore. Daniel didn't go straight home. He couldn't. His hands were still trembling on the wheel when he pulled into the depot, the coin sitting on the passenger seat like an accusation. The garage was half full, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. A few other drivers lingered near the vending machines, trading stories in tired voices. Their laughter carried, brittle around the edges, the way it always did at the end of a long night. Daniel parked in his usual spot, killed the engine, and just sat there. The coin gleamed faintly in the dim light. It hadn't stopped since Philip left it. Daniel picked it up again, turning it over in his fingers. The etchings still refused to hold still, lines curving one way and then another, shimmering in ways his mind struggled to pin down. The metal was cold, unnaturally so, as though it carried the chill of a place where heat didn't belong. Finally, he slid into his pocket and stepped out of the cab. His boots echoed against the concrete floor, a little too loud in the cavernous space. He joined the others by the vending machines, nodding and greeting. Quiet night. One of them asked, a wiry man named Jorge who always smelled faintly of cigarette smoke. Daniel shrugged. Strange one. Jorge chuckled. They're all strange, Dan. Comes with the territory. Daniel hesitated. He wanted to say more, but how was he supposed to put it? I picked up a passenger who led me to a street that doesn't exist and vanished without opening the door. He'd be laughed out of the room. Night drivers tolerated a lot of weirdness, but there were limits to what anyone would believe. Still, something in him itched to share. Slowly, he pulled the coin from his pocket and held it out. Guy left me this. Jorge leaned closer, squinting. What the hell is that? Some kind of token? Another driver, Marla, stepped forward, her sharp eyes narrowing as she studied the coin. Looks old. Really old. Yeah, Daniel said. Didn't look like regular money. He just left it. Didn't even pay cash or card. The others passed it around, murmuring their thoughts. None could place the design. Some guessed it was foreign, others said antique. But when the coin reached an older driver named Henry, quiet, gray-haired, with more years behind the wheel than anyone else in the depot, his reaction was different. The moment his fingers brushed the metal, he went pale. His lips pressed into a thin line, and he shoved the coin back into Daniel's hand, as if it had burned him. Where'd you get this? Henry asked, voice low and urgent. Daniel froze. Passenger gave it to me. Why? You know it? Henry's eyes flicked toward the others, then back to Daniel. Forget it. Just get rid of it. What do you mean, get rid of it? Daniel demanded. Henry shook his head, already turning away. Some fares aren't worth the money, kid. Some rides you don't take twice. He grabbed his jacket and walked out without another word, leaving Daniel standing in silence, the coin cold in his hand. The others exchanged uneasy looks, but said nothing. Eventually, the conversation drifted back to safer topics. drunks who couldn't pay, traffic cops with nothing better to do, the usual grind. But Daniel barely heard them. His mind was stuck on Henry's reaction, the sudden fear in the older man's eyes. He pocketed the coin again and left soon after, the night air cool against his skin as he stepped outside. The city felt different. Still busy in pockets, bars closing, early workers starting their day, but its rhythm seemed altered, offbeat, like he was slightly out of sync with the world around him. By the time Daniel got home, exhaustion had set in, but sleep offered no refuge. He drifted in and out of uneasy dreams, endless stretches of road winding through fog, headlights cutting across abandoned houses, street signs with names he couldn't read. At the edges of it all, a faint humming threaded through the silence. He woke before dawn, heart pounding, the sound still echoing faintly in his ears. The coin sat on his nightstand where he had left it, glinting faintly in the dim light, as if it were waiting. For the first time in 12 years, Daniel found himself dreading the next night's shift. Daniel tried to convince himself he could let it go, but he couldn't. Every time he reached for his keys, every time he stepped into the cab, the weight of the coin in his pocket tugged at him. It was more than curiosity. It was as if the thing wanted him to notice it, to keep it close. And though he tried to bury himself in routine fares, late shift nurses, bar hoppers, couples arguing in the back seat, he found his eyes wandering to side streets he didn't recognize, alleys that seemed narrower than they should be, intersections that flickered in and out of familiarity. The city had begun to change for him. It wasn't just in his head, or at least he didn't think it was. He started asking questions, casually at first. A word slipped into conversations at the depot, between sips of burnt coffee. Ever had a passenger who gave you directions to a neighborhood that doesn't exist? Most drivers shrugged, laughed, or muttered about drunk fares sending them to the wrong addresses. But a few grew quiet. Marla, the sharp-eyed driver who'd studied the coin, told him once, "I had a guy, years back. Didn't say much. Wore this old coat that smelled like damp wool. Gave me directions like he knew the streets better than I did. Except, none of it matched up. I let him out near the river, but when I checked the back seat, he was gone. Just like that." She snapped her fingers. Never told anyone else. Didn't want to sound crazy. Another driver swore he'd picked up a man who hummed under his breath the entire ride. When Daniel pressed, the driver grew evasive. Couldn't get the sound out of my head for days. Drove me nuts. Don't want to talk about it. The more he listened, the more pieces fell into place. The stories were scattered, inconsistent in their details, but the core was always the same. A pale, polite passenger who appeared in odd places, gave precise directions to streets that shouldn't exist, and vanished before the ride ended. And always something left behind. A coin, a slip of paper, a token that didn't belong. When he brought it up again to Henry, the only one who had reacted with outright fear, the old man shut him down. "You don't want to go looking for it," Henry said. His voice was flat and final. "The more you notice, the harder it is to stop. That thing, whoever he is, he's not just a fare. He's a hook, and if you let him, he'll reel you in." But Daniel couldn't stop. He dug through online forums, late-night threads where anonymous drivers swapped ghost stories between complaints about fares and dispatcher screw-ups. Buried in the noise were echoes of the same tale. The quiet passenger, the wrong directions, the relics that didn't belong. Some claimed it went back decades, some said longer. One post, written in shaky grammar and riddled with typos, claimed that those who picked them up more than once eventually vanished themselves. Cab found, driver not. That was all. No explanation. Just absence. Daniel sat staring at the screen for a long time, the glow of his laptop painting the room in cold light. He thought about the coin on his nightstand, about Philip's humming, about the way the city had folded in on itself that night, twisting into a shape that shouldn't exist. He told himself he wasn't afraid, but the truth gnawed at him. He wasn't just afraid of the passenger. He was afraid of what the passenger might be showing him. Because when he drove now, past midnight, headlights slicing through fog, he sometimes glimpsed roads that shouldn't be there. Side streets with names he didn't recognize. Alleys that stretched too far. Windows glowing in houses that weren't on any map. And sometimes, just at the edge of the light, he thought he saw a figure standing still, waiting. Daniel knew, with a sinking certainty, that he hadn't seen the last of Philip. It happened on a Tuesday night, weeks after the first ride. The shift had been uneventful, almost boring. Daniel ferried a drunk office worker back to his apartment, picked up a nurse finishing the graveyard shift, drove a couple who argued in low, poisonous tones the entire ride. The city felt ordinary again, almost reassuringly so. And then, just past 3 in the morning, he turned onto a quiet stretch of road near the edge of downtown. The streetlights buzzed faintly, pools of light straining against the mist. And there, standing beneath one of them, was Philip. The man looked exactly as he had before. Same pale skin, same still posture, same coat with its outdated cut. His face was calm, expectant, as though he had simply been waiting for Daniel to arrive. Daniel's stomach knotted. His first instinct was to keep driving. Pretend he hadn't seen him. Pretend the night could end without this encounter. But his hands betrayed him, easing off the accelerator, guiding the cab toward the curb as if drawn by something beyond choice. Philip opened the door and slipped into the back seat with the same quiet precision as before. He folded his hands neatly on his lap and offered a faint smile, just enough to suggest recognition. "Evening, Daniel," he said. Daniel froze, his fingers tightening on the wheel. He had never told him his name. "You." His voice cracked, harsher than intended. "You remember me?" "Of course." Philip's tone was polite, almost warm. "You were kind enough to bring me part of the way. I was hoping you'd come again." Daniel swallowed, the cab suddenly feeling smaller, airless. He wanted to demand answers, who he was, what he wanted, what the coin had meant, but when he opened his mouth, the words tangled on his tongue. Philip leaned back slightly, calm as ever. "Shall we?" Daniel hesitated, but the meter clicked on with a soft electronic beep. His foot pressed the accelerator, and the cab rolled forward. The streets changed quickly this time, faster than before. Familiar intersections vanished behind them. Street lights grew dim, their glow paling against a deepening fog. Buildings leaned into the mist like silent witnesses. The city Daniel knew, the city he had memorized block by block, slipped away with every turn. Philip gave his instructions calmly, never glancing at a phone, never checking a map. Left at the corner, straight through the underpass, right when the road narrows. Each command came with the certainty of someone who wasn't navigating, but returning. Daniel's pulse quickened. "Where are we going?" he asked, voice tight. Philip smiled faintly. "Home." The word lingered in the air, heavier than it should have been. Daniel gripped the wheel tighter. "What's at home?" Philip's gaze met his in the rearview mirror. His eyes were dark, unreadable, but there was something beneath them, a flicker, as if more than one expression pressed against the surface. "You'll see soon enough." The cab rolled deeper into the shifting streets. The fog thickened until the headlights seemed to carve tunnels through it, the world narrowing to what lay immediately ahead. Shadows stirred at the edges, too tall, too deliberate to be tricks of the light. Daniel tried not to look at them, tried to keep his focus on the road, but the sense of being watched pressed in from all sides. He cleared his throat, forcing his voice to remain steady. "You've done this with other drivers, haven't you?" Philip tilted his head slightly, considering. "Some," he said softly. "Not all make it this far." Daniel's grip on the wheel tightened. His instincts screamed to turn around, to abandon the route, to throw Philip out and flee back to familiar streets. But something deeper, something colder, whispered that it wouldn't matter, that the path had already been chosen. They passed a row of houses Daniel had never seen before, their windows faintly glowing behind thick curtains. He caught the faintest glimpse of movement in one of them, a figure shifting the curtain aside to peer out, only to vanish when he looked directly at it. Philip's voice broke the silence, calm as ever. Almost there. Daniel's breath caught. The words were the same as last time, but now they carried a weight that set his pulse racing. He could feel it, the sense of a boundary drawing near, a threshold he was about to cross. The cab moved forward, obedient, into streets that no longer felt like part of the city at all. The streets thinned until they were no longer streets at all. What stretched ahead of Daniel's headlights looked like roads in shape only. Pale strips of gravel edged by skeletal trees, their branches tangled against a sky without stars. The fog pressed in from all sides, swallowing the sound of the engine, muffling even the rhythm of Daniel's breath. Philip sat motionless in the back seat, his hands folded neatly, his presence filling the cab like a weight. "Where is this?" Daniel whispered. His voice sounded strange, too loud in the silence. Philip tilted his head, as though puzzled by the question. "We're close now. Just keep driving." Daniel's instinct screamed at him to turn around, to wrench the wheel, to flee, but when he glanced in the rearview mirror, the road behind had dissolved into blackness. No streetlights, no buildings, no city, just void. The cab shuddered as though it had crossed some unseen barrier. The dashboard lights dimmed, the engine's hum faltered. Daniel pressed the accelerator harder, desperate to keep moving, but the vehicle responded sluggishly, as if resisting the place it had entered. Philip leaned forward slightly, his eyes meeting Daniel's in the mirror. For the first time, the faint smile dropped away. His expression was not unkind, but it was something colder, inevitable. "Final. Almost home," he murmured. The words chilled Daniel to his core. They weren't a destination. They were sentence. He risked another glance at the mirror, and his breath caught. Philip was no longer alone. Layered in the reflection were others, faint, flickering figures, all variations of the same man. Some older, some younger, some wearing coats from decades past. Their faces overlapped, shifting like cards in a deck being shuffled. Countless versions of Philip stacked behind one another. Their mouths moved in unison, though no sound came out. Daniel tore his eyes back to the road, heart hammering. The cab's headlights flickered, cutting through the fog in weak pulses. The trees lining the road leaned inward, their branches arching together until they formed a tunnel. At its end glimmered a faint, impossible light. Philip's voice filled the car, calm and patient. "There. Do you see it?" Daniel's throat was dry. "What is it?" "Where the roads end. Where we return." The tunnel drew closer, the lights swelling until it was all Daniel could see. The cab groaned beneath him, metal straining, as if the vehicle itself understood what lay ahead and resisted. Daniel's hands shook violently on the wheel. His mind screamed to stop, to fight, to do anything, but his body moved like it belonged to someone else. The light engulfed them. The cab was found 2 days later. It sat neatly in its bay at the depot, parked as though Daniel had ended his shift like any other night. The engine was cold. The keys still hung from the ignition. The meter had reset, but Daniel was gone. The other drivers whispered about it in hushed voices, each careful not to say too much. They told themselves it wasn't their business. People vanish sometimes. Drivers quit, leave town, start over somewhere new. But in the quiet, when no one else was listening, a few admitted what they really thought, that Daniel had picked up the wrong passenger twice. And on the passenger seat of the cab lay another coin. This one was older, much older. Its surface was worn nearly smooth, but faint lines still traced patterns no one could recognize. Cold to the touch, as though it had never belonged in this world. Long after Daniel disappeared, his name stopped being mentioned around the depot. That was how drivers dealt with it. Silence. Pretend he had just quit. Pretend he had moved on. Pretend nothing unusual had happened at all. But silence doesn't hold forever. New drivers asked questions. They noticed the empty hook where Daniel's jacket used to hang, the way the older drivers shifted in their seats when someone brought up his name. And eventually, someone always cracked. It was usually Marla. After a few cups of burnt coffee, after a shift that left her too tired to care, she'd lean across the table and say, "You ever hear about the passenger who doesn't exist?" The story came in fragments, never the same twice. Some said Daniel had picked up a pale man in an old coat. Others claimed the passenger knew his name before he spoke it. A few swore that Daniel had driven into streets that weren't on any map, neighborhoods swallowed decades ago, and never made it back. The only detail that stayed constant was the coin. Someone always brought up the coin. Drivers whispered that one had been found in Daniel's cab, older than anyone could place. They said Henry, the oldest of them all, had seen one before, back when he was young, back when another driver had vanished the same way. No one asked Henry directly. He wouldn't answer anyway. He only smoked his cigarettes in silence, eyes on the floor, as if waiting for something he couldn't stop. Over time, the legend grew. New details bled into it. That the passenger hummed songs no one recognized. That if you saw him once you were marked, that the streets he led you down were not streets at all, but thresholds. Some said he was a ghost from a neighborhood that had burned decades ago. Others said he was older still, a shadow that traveled wherever cities built roads, waiting for night drivers to carry him home. And when a driver disappeared, because drivers do disappear, sometimes for reasons that have nothing to do with legends, the story was there, ready to explain it. So now, late at night, when the depot grows quiet and the city outside hums with secrets, the story makes its rounds again. A half joke, a half warning. They say if you drive long enough, you'll see him. A pale man under a flickering streetlight, waiting patiently. If you pick him up once, he'll leave you something behind. If you pick him up twice, you won't come back at all. And somewhere in the depot, on a shelf no one dares to touch, lies a small box. Inside are coins. 3, maybe 4, that no one claims to have placed there. Each one colder than the last.